911 Program Management Division Chief at the 911 branch. My backstory is I started as a line level dispatcher at the city of Sacramento, worked my way through the ranks to assistant manager there and eventually promoted to manager at the Placer County Sheriff's Office. I spent 21.5 years at the city of Sacramento and 3 years at Placer County Sheriff when the state 911 office had an opening. What Budge and the team was doing was of a lot of interest to me. And the one thing that the 911 branch didn't have is somebody with that inside PSAP perspective. So I was very honored when the position was offered to me, and I'm very excited for what we're doing and also the perspective from the PSAP, what I believe the relationship that we have with the PSAPs and how we take every step that we do, we take the PSAPs into our decision making. The last thing we want to do is create a negative impact or impact our relationship. So my presentation, I just wanted to cover a few things really high level. I will stop in between slides to answer any questions that folks might have. And of course, at the end, any questions that come up, I'll stick around for that. The presentation is public. So if you guys want to share that with the attendees, you absolutely can. And then if you need my contact information, let me know. You can definitely share my contact information throughout the group if you want to meet offline and discuss anything special. Some of the things I wanted to go over today are the COVID-19 impacts, where we are with our call handling, our new master purchase agreement. Obviously, the next gen 911 update, our migration plan, the implementation of cloud-based CPE, outage reporting, and then our Assembly Bill 911 Feasibility Study update. So we'll jump right on in. COVID-19 has been a huge impact for the state of California. Obviously, to our PSAPs being 24/7, we just can't tell our dispatchers to stay home, work from home, we'll transfer 911 calls right to your home number. That doesn't exist. So when all of the restrictions started, Budge and I started a PSAP outreach. We started to meet with our PSAPs by region and just continue to communicate, wanting them to understand what OES can do for them in the way of resourcing and in facilitating any request for services, equipment, whatever they need at the local level. Also, we wanted to make sure that PSAPs were understanding that our job was mission critical. We were given very direct direction from the governor himself not to slow down. If we can get access, continue the NG 911 deployment. So through these meetings, we started to learn, learn more about the impacts for staffing. When your 911 positions, your radio positions sit right next to each other, you may not have the physical PSAP space to social distance. There were some PSAPs that got very creative in implementing some of the like plexiglass screens, getting conference room space and putting laptop positions in other areas of their PSAP, or even moving to a backup PSAP in some instances. So as we move forward, the 911 branch is working with the Long Range Planning Committee to start an outreach to the PSAPs to collect data on how they handled the COVID response and the impacts of wildfire season and the public safety power shutoff season and everything else that California gets to enjoy every year. We want to collect that data and do some sort of analysis and provide resources to PSAPs, especially as PSAP management evolves. We want to make sure that there's some good historic data placed somewhere in a repository. So follow the LRPC, the Long Range Planning Committee. They meet every quarter, typically the day before the 911 Advisory Board. It will be reaching out, looking for volunteers to help facilitate data gathering. We did see some technician availability. There were disruptions there. We had a few technicians who were showing signs of COVID-19. They had to get tested, were quarantined. Some tested negative, so it was a few days they were out of commission. Some did test positive, so it was until they were able to get cleared medically to come back to work. So that technician availability did impact the status of our projects. Something we did not anticipate was supply chains. In the initial COVID-19 response, a lot of the harbors were shut down pending how they were going to handle ships and personnel bringing materials and goods into the United States. So that pushed some of our technical supplies back, and some of those orders have yet to be filled. The feedback that we got, some PSAPs were not willing to allow technicians in, which was fine. We worked with those PSAPs to further define what the needs were. And then those that were allowing technicians in, we wanted to make sure that technicians reprioritized visits and they got into in any place where we can get work done. And then we continue to brief our task force in any PSAP meetings that we had. We wanted to make sure there was a good line of communication, and also be prepared for some of the uncertainty, and really start some of the planning considerations. One of the things that Budge and I did was make sure everybody understood how their alternate route worked, how they can coordinate a PSAP evacuation, whether that was for a deep cleaning in the event of a COVID exposure, or if their staff was just overrun by COVID, how they can get their calls moved somewhere else and coordinate regionally to support the 911 workload. So I'll take a quick pause here if anybody has any questions. Okay, no questions there. So the 911 branch, we decided to build a next generation 911 lab. Our desire there was to first validate that our NG 911 service providers were able to provide the services as defined in our contract and meet all functional requirements. And then we needed a place for our vendors, the NG 911 service providers and the call handling vendors, to collaborate to build an interface that met the NENA I3 standard, so we can make sure that we can get the call delivered from the caller to the dispatcher, meeting all I3 requirements. So in the process of the initial lab testing, we were able to deliver calls through the core service into the call handling equipment, and we found some I3 requirement challenges with our current, I'll call it legacy CPE. So we're working with all of our CPE vendors. It's primarily Vesta and Viper. They hold about a 96% footprint in the state of California. So they're the big ones that we need to get fixed first. That work by contract, anything that's done, the vendors on contract have to support that work at no cost to the state and no cost to the PSAP. And that's really important. I want to make sure to emphasize, and please share with your regional PSAPs, that there should be no cost for this, as their contract says they need to be I3 compliant. There may be some appliance, some small work that needs to be done at the PSAP. If that is validated, we'll coordinate with the PSAPs to make sure they understand what's happening, and all of their questions are answered at the local level. Currently, all of our Vesta CPE installations are on hold pending clearance in the lab. And the reason we did that is we didn't want our CPE vendor to deploy a solution that didn't meet the I3 requirement to cut over and then have to go back and do some changes. So we coordinated with them and said, let's put it on pause. Let's make lab clearing a priority. And we're working currently with the CPE providers. We're hoping to have all of the testing done next week. It may bleed into the first part of September, but we're getting some good collaboration there to get the I3 requirements met. And then once all our requirements are met, we get all services validated, then we're going to green light all of our CPE installations. So I'll take a quick pause there. Any questions? Okay. So this is a slide most of you have probably seen at some part of Budge's next gen discussions. When we started the project many years ago, Budge really realized that there's a few puzzle pieces here. We have to have the PSAP installs, we have to have the OSP integration, we have to have test and integration, and then we have to have transition. So we've been working with our NG911 service providers to develop a migration policy or a migration plan and get all of their services tested and validated. I wanted to keep this slide in here just so you guys had this as a reference, and if you didn't have it, this shows each and every one of our NG911 regions. It has the state project manager as well as the vendor project manager listed on there. Something to really point out here is our deployment timeline. Because of COVID-19 and some of the impacts, we anticipate our timeline to slip a little bit, maybe as much as 3 months. So that March 2021 date there for the central region may slip out a little bit. As we gain more data on that, we'll keep everybody up to date on the project status. We like to point out this is our optimistic goal, our optimistic timeline here. This is if there's no fires, there's no evacuations, there's no floods, there's no COVID, there's nothing. These are the timelines that we wanted to put on paper to meet and to really drive for. Understanding that life happens in California, so there will be some slippage. Currently, we're seeing about a 4 to 12 week delay in some of our project status. Some is based on geography and some is based on service and supplies. Any questions? Okay, this is a remediation workflow. I wanted to keep this in here just if you haven't seen it, it's a resource for you to work with your PSAPs and understand exactly what's happening in the back room. So the yellow boxes are the work that's conducted by the region network service provider, that's RNSP. The blue boxes are the prime network service provider, or PNSP. The white boxes are either work done by the local PSAP and their staff, or contracted through the 911 branch, or either one of the prime or region vendors. Some of the work there is electricity, construction, moving racks, reorganizing your server rooms. We need to make sure that we have space in there to install one 19-inch rack. The prime network service provider needs a half rack, the region needs a half a rack, and then we bring 208 volt power into that rack. If that's not available at the PSAP, the state does pay for that remediation. Any questions about remediation?
Yeah, Paul, I had one question from a local base. They were just asking, is there a plan in place for the, because they're in a weird spot since they don't really have any state funding. Have you guys been working through that with some of the bases to get the NG911? Is there a plan or a workflow for them?
Great question. So about a year and a half ago, we were introduced to a team out of the Pentagon. And they were the four military, the leadership for the four militaries. And they introduced us to each of the branch leaders in the Pentagon and then at the local level. And for the last about 18 months, we've been coordinating with them. We were told at the beginning of our conversations that the military could not have state funding. They could not accept state funds. So I met with a couple of them on the side and I said, provide a citation to that. Where is it written? And they said, well, for years we've been told we can't take your money for call handling, we can't take your money for network upgrades, we can't take this, we can't take that. So we pushed and said, prove it to us, show us where it says in writing, and if it's in writing, let's see if we can change that, because we have funding. And think about it, the military members serving in California are typically buying telephone services in the state of California, which result in them paying the Setna rate each month when they pay their phone bill. So their money is paying for 911 services. They should have the same access on base as they do off base. So about December, we met with some Pentagon attorneys. They scoured every book, they looked everywhere, they could find nothing. And recently the Pentagon gave us a ruling, we can give them money. So we have been working with the local military installations. The first one kicking off is Vandenberg Air Base. We're doing a CPE upgrade for them. We're in talks with Edwards Air Force Base now. The military has agreed to accept our NG911 equipment. We're designing a meet point is not to interfere with their network security protocols. And we will be funding the equipment, network delivery, and call handling if they choose to accept our call handling. So great question, Tim. Okay, this is our total network. And this we illustrate the complexity here. So on the left side of this diagram, we have all of our 911 traffic coming in from the originating service providers. It's hitting our prime and region data centers, being identified as a 911 call. We're calling it 911 traffic now because it could really be anything. It's not just a voice call any longer. It's going to traverse in through the cloud, through core service, get identified what PSAP it needs to be routed to, and then delivered to the PSAP. So we're going to have both wired fiber optic connection as well as LTE connection, and then the additional layer specific to California is we're adding in the CAPSnet or the microwave solution to support NG911 call handling. So what we've asked all of our providers to do is each provider, region and prime, have to bring 2 diverse network paths into the PSAP. So that'll be 4 connections. Then we're going to overlay some LTE, and then we're going to add in the CAPSnet. And all of that will be able to diversify the network. So if we have a fiber optic cut, it can be supported either through LTE or CAPSnet or the redundant fiber coming into PSAP. If it's a catastrophic failure, then the LTE and CAPSnet will be able to support the network. So in theory, the PSAP should never go down unless it's really a catastrophic event. And at that point, the loss of 911 is probably not our main focus. It's going to be responding to that critical disaster. This is just a graphic to give kind of a little spot in history where we are with our current PSAP installations. I'll focus here in the south. We have 61 of the 92 PSAPs in the southern region remediated. Equipment installs, we have no equipment installs, but we have 50 PSAPs with circuits. And I believe one of the challenges for the southern region is supply chain disruption. So as soon as the supply chain gets caught up and they're able to build out that equipment, then installs will continue. And then this is our central and Los Angeles region. LA, we have 45 of the 80 PSAPs. 13 PSAPs have their equipment installed, and then 7 PSAPs have circuits installed. They continue to build out, continue to push. Again, we're focused on 2021, but understanding how things happen, we do have some flexibility in our schedule. Any questions? Either I've put everybody to sleep or I'm really doing a great job.
Great job.
Thank you.
Doing great.
So Migration. So we're at that point now in the NG911 project. Traction has been made. We're doing this, guys. How long have we been talking about this? 10 years? Maybe 12 years? And we're finally at the point where we're scheduling migration from selective router to real next-gen 911 traffic, 911 traffic delivery to the PSAP. So we wanted to talk through what that looks like today. And this is a graph of our legacy 911 call routing. Originating service provider delivers 911 traffic in, it goes to the selective router. Selective router makes the decision of which PSAP it's got to go to. The challenge with the selective router is you're limited on how many PSAPs can get that call. If your PSAP is not connected to the selective router, that PSAP can't have a call delivered or transferred. That's the big challenge in legacy 911. So as we move towards our migration, here are some of the talking points to validate our plan. Our originating service providers don't have the intelligence to know where that call needs to be routed. We need somebody else other than your telephone company to make that decision. So what we're asking is our service provider to direct the traffic either to a selective router or to an NGCS, Next Gen Core Service Provider. And we're not asking them to do both. We're not asking to add additional circuits. What we're asking them to do is deliver to selective router today, and when we tell you, disconnect that, connect into core service, and you'll be off selective router. We validated that all of our call handling, our CPE, can receive I3 either through SIP or through a legacy PSAP gateway. So somehow we will be able to deliver to each and every call handling solution in the state. We prefer to do it in true I3 requirement. That's our push. And our CPE has the ability to support the CAMA connection in a legacy PSAP gateway and an IP connection at the same time. So there, what will allow us to do is deliver either over CAMA or either over IP, and the dispatchers will still receive their calls. In the lab, we're validating that the CPE can handle everything 1 through 5. And then once we do that, figure out what we need at the PSAP, our Next Gen 911 cutover will begin. And this is the way it's going to look. So this is our legacy network. Our Next Gen Core Service is going to be stood up. We're going to have some connections in place, available, tested, vetted, validated that they can deliver from the meet point of the originating service provider to the appropriate PSAPs that they're connected to. Once that validation is done, we're going to disconnect the originating service provider one at a time, have them connect into our core service and deliver. And I'll use the example of we have 2 major telephone service providers in our region. We have AT&T and Sebastian Telephone. So we're going to take Sebastian Telephone Company first and say connect into our core service. So that solid black line going from OSP to the green Next Gen Core Service Provider will be Sebastian. AT&T, we're going to continue to deliver their calls across the selective router. Once Sebastian, as this example, is validated, everything's flowing, we're good, then we're going to contact AT&T and say, AT&T, it's your turn, cut. And then they'll deliver through core service and not through selective router. We are going to keep selective routers stood up for a period of time and continue to monitor them to ensure that there's nothing else that we've not found connected to the selective router. Once we validate that there's 0 traffic, we'll go ahead and decommission that individual selective router and move to the next migration plan, the next phase. Any questions about the migration plan? All right. So we've developed a few phases. Phase 1, we've identified selective routers with the least amount of PSAPs connected to them. There's one in the central region, one in the northern region, and one in the southern region. So we have AT&T in the Sonora Selective Router, AT&T at the Placerville Niagara Selective Router, and then AT&T at the El Centro Selective Router. So what we're going to start doing is working with those PSAPs, working with the selective router providers, and working with the originating service providers coming into each of those selective routers, get some really deep dive discussions going, make sure everything on the NG911 side is up, tested, validated. PSAPs can take their test calls, and then we're going to start the migration, one OSP at a time. Get them in, have a little bake time, make sure everybody's good, and then we're going to use phase one as our ability to build best practices and lessons learned. And then we're going to move into our additional phases. And here are all the selective routers in the state of California. This slide doesn't look very good on this presentation, I apologize. But we have 5 phases with the anticipated cutover in April of 2021. Again, that window is a little fluid right now. It's likely going to slip a couple of months, but not too much. This is what we're really driving to. And I'll take a quick pause here. Does anybody have any questions?
I guess a quick question for everyone on Vesta in the labs. Does it seem like it's simply a software issue, or are they going to be dealing with actual hardware issues with all the connectivity?
Right now, it looks software. There may be an appliance that's needed to support some security. We'll be validating that in the test, in the lab. But right now, it looks like it's just going to require a software upgrade. Now, with that being said, if you're on an older version and your CPE's been in for a while, that may require some hardware to be changed out. But we'll work with those individual PSAPs when we drill down into that project a little bit farther. All right. So one of the things you've probably heard the branch talk about is we wanted to migrate from on-prem CPE to a data center or cloud-based CPE. This is an arena, there's a lot of industries who've moved to cloud-based PBX systems. The technology's there, it's been proven, it's been vetted, all except for 911. There are other states doing, they call it cloud, but it's really a data center call handling, and it works wonderful for them. So our team got together, they wrote an RFP. They started it about December of last year. They had some pretty aggressive timelines. They worked through the entire procurement process and executed all contracts in July. We had all vendors that submitted responses, with the exception of one, get on contract. And one of the conditions that the state was not willing to make was a change in our terms and conditions. We let the vendors know right away, we will not change terms and conditions of our contract. We'll negotiate other things. We'll take a look at everything else, but that's off the table. All of our vendors except one agreed to our terms and conditions. We had one vendor who said nope, and they ended up walking out of California. So we have 12 vendors with 19 CPE solutions available on contract. Andrew and I are working through a new funding policy now. The big caveat here is vendors are not eligible to sell off this new contract until all of their CPE has been tested and validated in the NG911 lab. And the reason for this is the cloud-based solution has not been vetted in the 911 industry that much. So we wanted to have lab clearance as a requirement to be able to sell in California, and they all agreed. All 12 vendors on contract agreed to go to our lab. And the other thing, we need NG911 trunks to be installed at the PSAP. So that way the trunks can be connected to your cloud-based CPE to deliver your 911 traffic. At the local level, there will be an interface with your local PBX to be able to take your 7-digit calls, pull them from on-prem up to the cloud, route them through your cloud-based CPE, and then pull them back down to the PSAP. So it's really exciting. The vendors were really excited to be a part of this because this is truly moving into the future and allows real flexibility for you to send dispatchers anywhere. And if you think about what an NG911 policy-based routing can do, and then the ability to log into your call handling anywhere that you can get internet access on a tariffed NG911 circuit, you could literally go from Riverside County to Butte County, sit in the fairgrounds at Butte County, pull out a tariffed LTE solution, log onto your laptop delivering your CPE solution, and get your calls from Riverside and Butte. So it's a really cool way for us to be able to support the needs of California in looking how we could do disaster planning in the future. So I'll take a quick pause. Anybody have any questions here? Okay. So I wanted to provide a list of our contractors here. This slide deck is available to you, so you can take this back and take a look at it. Our contract is still going through the redaction and approval process. Once it's redacted and made publicly available, you can reach out to us and we will be able to share it. We have to conform to the ADA accessibility requirements. So we'll be working to get that contract made accessible to be able to post on our website. Once it is posted up on the website, we'll make sure everybody knows so they can start looking at it. All right, Senate Bill 670 is a piece of legislation that was passed that mandated that originating service providers in California, all service providers, regardless of how you're delivering, whether it's wireless, VoIP, or wireline, have to report outages to Cal OES via email when there's 100 or more users in a single zip code, or 50% of the zip code is out if there's under 100 people. So, and then if there's 50% or more coverage degradation in a single zip code for wireless, they have to report that to us. So what OES is doing is when we get these outages, we're notifying the local PSAP, sheriff, emergency management teams. This is really important for situational awareness in the event that you have to do some sort of emergency notification system or emergency notification out to your community for whether it's a public safety update, evacuation, whatever. So this is a good thing. When this started on July 1, it became very clear that it was a big bite that we took, and we went from a few outage reports every day to literally hundreds each and every day. So we're working on a software solution to be able to ingest this data and then make the notification to the PSAPs. So there'll be more information on that coming soon. And then lastly, Assembly Bill 911 is the Manny Act. It's a feasibility study for the Office of Emergency Services to determine, is it feasible to have a statewide database managed by OES to collect information on individuals with disabilities, at risk, missing persons, older adults, specific health and safety information in the community, whether that's through a commercial establishment or through a private member of the community. When it first came out, it was really shaped towards the Smart 911 type database. So it would be linked to 911 call, you call 911, it would dip into a database, look, and if you had supplemental data in this database, it would pull it and deliver it with the 911 call to the call taker. So we put out a contract to have a vendor come in and do this feasibility study. 911 Authority was awarded the contract, and the way the legislation ended up written and approved, it actually identifies that we have to take data from the caller and deliver it to the first responder direct. So the best way to do that is through a CAD system, a CAD to CAD connection to be able to share between jurisdictions, or a solution that is independent of just 911. So 911 Authority is taking a look at that. And we had every PSAP in the state got a survey from 911 Authority. We had 302 total surveys received back. After they normalized the data, it came out to 270 complete, 100% complete surveys. The others were partially complete, had some missing data, and a couple agencies were so excited they submitted two. But what they're doing is they're analyzing how does this fit with 911, NG 911, CAD, records management, your mobile data computer, the communication tool, what you're using with your first responders. So they're normalizing the data now. They'll be drafting a response to start their conversation with the Long Range Planning Committee in October, and then deliver the draft to the advisory board in November, with a final report due on January 1st, 2021. So with that, that's our 911 branch update. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.